Okay, hi everybody, and welcome to Signature West Podcast. I'm your host, Sam West from Palm Springs, California. As you know, I'm a seasoned real estate agent since 1991, and I do the podcast to bring you inspiring stories. Some real estate related, some are not. Nonetheless, it's about Coachella Valley and Palm Springs. If you want to find out more, go to www.samwest.co. For the last 15 months, I've been trying to find the perfect guest for today's topic, and I wasn't able to. But leave it to the universe to align the stars together. And here I am with David Lazar. Say hi to David. Hi,
Hello,
David.
everyone.
Hello.
Hello, good morning.
How are you?
I'm great.
Um, David, I'm going to just read a little bit about you for the ones that are listening and watching. You founded Or Hamid Bar, which is the Jewish synagogue here in Palm Springs in 2019 with a group of local Palm Springs Jews and non-Jews in order to nourish spiritual Judaism community through study, worship, social justice. And you've been a rabbi since then. You grew up in the San Fernando Valley and you moved to Israel in 1975. And you finished high school. As soon as you finished high school, you served in the Israeli army. And it's a 5-year program for yeshiva students. In 1980, you joined a small group of young Israelis and you founded a moshav agricultural settlement in the Gaza Strip where your wife and yourself got married in 1981. And then you moved to Jerusalem. I'm going to cut the next part, but eventually you guys moved to Sweden. And from Sweden, you served as a rabbi for the Stockholm Jewish community, where and after that, you moved to Palm Springs in 2015. How does one go from Sweden to Palm Springs?
You mean without physical crisis between the cold and the heat?
And the options, I mean, out of all places, Sweden to Palm Springs, it's like usually it's
Well, It,
LA, it's
yeah,
New York.
it was an easy choice. My mother, who today is 97 and still lives in the house that I grew up in Sherman Oaks, San Fernando Valley. I wanted to be with her for the last part of her life, and indeed, for the last decade, we've had the privilege, the blessing of being close by. It's timed right. It's only 2 hours away. There was a time she came out here quite a bit as well. Now that's so she stays at home. But that's what drew us to California, and in particular to Palm Springs, because there was a job opening. And it wasn't so easy in my late 50s at the time. Now it's easier. There's a dearth of rabbis, but to find a job as being the rabbi of a congregation.
And how did you like Palm Springs back then when you first moved from Sweden to Palm Springs? It's very
You
different.
know, I was familiar with Palm Springs. I had an uncle and aunt that are
Okay.
since a blessed memory, since deceased. So I'd been here a number of times over the years, and I'm not sure I realized it was as hot as it is and has become.
In the summer.
Uh, but had a good idea, and what I enjoyed most about coming here was the calm and slow-paced lifestyle. Even driving here is different certainly than driving in Israel, Palestine, certainly than places like Paris and New York City. But
Oh, yeah.
Sweden didn't have a car. Very different also from personality of the people. In Sweden, people are not overly friendly to you when they don't know you. When they know you, it's a different story, perhaps. And here, people are friendly. We say hello to each other. And when we walk, I walk every day and say hello to everybody. And even the tourists who are a little bit startled, they say hello back, perhaps. But that's different. Sweden is not like that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, when I first read your bio, and I'm sure people that are listening or watching, when you read your bio, you check every box. And I hope I don't sound judgmental because I'm not trying to be. You check every box for being a conservative, loyalist, Israeli. I want to say on the right wing. But the little time I spoke to you, you really are not. So it's interesting that just looking at the cover of the book and all your boxes, you can be perceived as a one thing, and we'll get to that in a minute. Just want to put that out there for now till we get to it. Um, And people would think, you and I have nothing in common. I mean, you are Israeli, a rabbi, Jewish, American. I am Muslim, Egyptian, not a rabbi, American. Um, but the truth is, and I'm going to say this for the first time, we do have a lot in common. Um, and I want to ask you a question about that. And I think I mentioned to you, I had met you on Zoom at one of your services in 2020. I did Rosh Hashanah with you, and because I moved here in June of 2020. So I did Rosh Hashanah with you, and I did half of Yom Kippur, and those were my last hooray getting out of the entire system. Because I spent the prior 16 years with the Kabbalah Center in LA. Some good memories, lots of bad memories. And what I want to ask you is, you say you call Friday night Kabbalah Shabbat, and that's what your teaching, I think, is based on, Kabbalah Shabbat, which is your Friday night beginning of Shabbat. Is your teaching different from the Kabbalah Center?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I don't know anybody at the Kabbalah Center. I've just met people who have been there over the years, and I know what Kabbalah is. And the Kabbalah Center is called Kabbalah because of a particular type of mystical literature from medieval times, from the 13th century onward, that has influenced Judaism, greatly influenced Judaism, including the Hasidic movement, which is, a more popular form of Kabbalah. But that's only a small part of Judaism. Judaism is far greater than Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah means to
To
receive,
receive.
to accept. So when we say Kabbalat Shabbat, which is the normal Israeli term for a Friday evening service, it's the welcoming of Shabbat, Kabbalat Shabbat. So there's nothing really Kabbalistic from, with a capital K, from a Jewish mystical point of view in the services that I do. There's something that is a little bit meditative that some people may be confused with Kabbalah, but I don't know anything. I don't purport to be a scholar. I don't know the spheres, the influences, the different worlds. I live in this world. I'm not a mystic. I'm not seeking to bring the lower world together with the higher world. I don't negate that. People, if that's their goal in life, I wish them much success. But my concern is this world right here.
Because
I'm not concerned with what happens.
the reason I'm asking, on your bio, I think when I read it earlier, you said that when you opened Palm Springs, it's for Jews and non-Jews, all for a spiritual realm. And that's when I got triggered, to be honest, because when you go to the Kabbalah Center, it's basically the same cover up, if you want to call it, for them. I'm not saying it's you. I started, obviously I have no background in Judaism. I have no knowledge at all till I joined, and I became very much informed, probably more than the regular Jewish person out there. And you start they start teaching you. And again, I'm not here to badmouth them but I just want to know if there's something out there. Is it the same or not? If you're going to be spiritual, you need to study the Torah. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And then after that, if you need to be more spiritual because you're not being spiritual enough, you need to keep kosher. All right, well, I can try that. And the next thing you know, well, that's not even enough, because it's never enough. You gotta, do all the high holidays, the 21 days, all the beginning from Rosh Hashanah to Simchat Torah. And then you start to wondering, that's when it becomes problematic for even the ones that you met or somebody like myself. Because everywhere I went, when I start to leave the system, and I have to say, I judged you when I came to your Rosh Hashanah, as they say in Hebrew, Chas Shalom. I judged you because we're taught the only place that does it correctly, the only place that does the connection correctly, is the Kabbalah Center. Anything else is just maybe whatever. So of course, by me coming to you, because you're the only one, I came to Palm Springs for a reason, because I didn't want any Kabbalah Center near me to be tempted. So I was still 1 foot in, 1 foot out. So I came to you when I did your Rosh Hashanah. I was like, oh, he's not doing it right. No, because I'm so self-righteous, and that's what we become. I know it all, and I was taught by so and so and so and so, and we're not taught to do it this way. And then, so I'm just trying to understand from you, um, since it's the same label, Kabbalah Shabbat, Kabbalah Shabbat, Kabbalah Kabbalah, is your obviously yours is different from what you just said earlier. And do you have any idea why their their movement got to be so popular?
No, and I didn't understand that we would be talking about the Kabbalah Center today. I'm not really interested. I don't know anything about them. What I do know, I'm not terribly, it doesn't attract me at all. I'm not interested in getting people to keep kosher. I'm not interested in people buying the book of Zohar to have in their library to protect their homes, the little that I do know. What I'm interested is being, if I can, a bridge between the Jewish tradition and people who are out there, most of whom are born Jewish or have converted to Judaism. But I found in my work in Sweden that many people who were either married to Jews or were born to a Jewish father but not a Jewish mother, so not officially Jewish, they felt a desire to be part of the Jewish community. That is to do what we're doing. And what we do is worship in a particular way, which has some music, it has some chanting, it's not Kabbalistic chanting, it has silence and it has study. And what we do together is to study. And what we do together is to look at the world around us and see that which is unjust, that which needs to be fixed. And we take those things together, the worship, the study, and the doing to form what I think is the Jewish tradition, with my interpretation of the Jewish tradition. Anybody who would like to be part of that, Fadal. They should come, they should be part of it. Ahlan wa sahlan, right? Shalom aleichem. They should be part of it. All right. And
Yeah.
so that's what my goal was. Perhaps if I had looked at knew about the Kabbalah Center's marketing, I would have steered away from the same wording because I certainly didn't mean to deceive or to mislead people like you because I don't want to say we couldn't be more different, but we couldn't be that much more different, I think, from what I understand.
And I
And there
don't,
were others over the years that came from the Kabbalah Center that misunderstood and also told me, by the way, that they were very, very surprised that I was doing it the wrong way. Now, I'm a student of Judaism. My bio, you gave certain bullet points, but there's other bullet points there as well. For instance,
I
I
know.
grew up in a liberal Jewish, very committed family. I rebelled against my parents. I became Orthodox when I was 14, 15, 16, and I had a different outlook. Once I got to Hebrew University and studied in an academic manner after my life in the Gaza Strip and we lived in Jerusalem, then I went back to my liberal ways, but I began to see how Judaism spread itself out and drastically changed in the 19th century in Europe, more so in Europe than it did in the lands where Jews lived under Islam. It remained more traditional. And then coming to Israel, I saw all different kinds of Judaism. I'm a student of Judaism. So there is really no right way and no wrong way. There are many, many
You would
right ways.
think, I mean, who's to say right or wrong? I mean, but I thought, again, that's part of my, uh, I did a documentary called Surviving a Cult because I really believe to this day I was in a cult for 16 years, but that's a different conversation. What made you leave your liberal family background and go to Orthodox background?
Yeah, it's what we called zeitgeist. It was in the air. If I was 3 years, 4 years older, I would have been a full-fledged hippie. When I was 14, I had long hair, long curly hair, but I wore my kippah to school. I went to public school. I was, developing this very strong Jewish identity, but also I love Neil Young. I love Carole King. I love, Cat Stevens. Those were the, or uh, that was the world. But many of us rebelled. Many of us felt it didn't answer our needs, our Jewish needs. A bunch of us in California and other places in the United States who were born in 56, 57, 58 became Orthodox. Some of them are still. Some of my childhood friends don't talk to me because I'm a heretic in their eyes, the things that I've done since then, especially when it comes to gay, lesbian weddings that I started to do in the year 2000. Another thing, by the way, not in the bullet points that you said, if you read just part of the story, you get a very, very narrow view of who I am, but there's a wide diversity. I take things as they come in my life and in society, and I interpret, and I'm willing to take a jump. And I was willing when I was 14, 15 to take a jump. Let's try this orthodoxy. But at some point, the real question is not why I was lured to that because I wanted to have a more all-inclusive Jewish lifestyle. The real question is why did I leave that circle? And that's because I saw in that circle certain injustices, I saw oppression, not only to the other, to the non-Jew, but also to the Jew in the strong. And you see this in fundamentalist Islam as well, right? People that they insist on you doing something very, very specific, which has to do more about their own issues than it has to do about you. So
If
it's a
it's
very,
not
very
that,
complex thing.
and if it's not that specific, then you're off track, then you're not worthy of, then, God's going to instruct you with lighting. Like I said earlier, you're not being spiritual enough. Well, what do you want me to, I mean, at what point am I, is it a 24/7, die hard and, oh, it's just a really complete, that's when I give, like I said, it becomes a cultish mindset. And hey, I did what I did, and here we are. So,
Okay.
let's fast forward till today. And the film No Lands, No Other Land. I can't even speak this morning. No Other Land. For the ones that are watching and listening, if you don't know what we're talking about here, it's the documentary that won the Oscar in 2025, just a few months ago. And it's taking place about the life in the West Bank and how the Palestinians live day to day. And the directors are one Palestinian and one Israeli. You might have seen them on TV, you might have not. Hopefully, you have. David, how did you get involved with? By the way, the film is being screened here in Palm Springs on the 24th of May in a couple of weeks. So, David, how did you get involved with the screening on the 24th?
Okay. My politics are very left wing when it comes to Israel. That we'll just focus it right now. They have been for probably since it started to change in the 80s, but since the 90s, and I became relatively active for a rabbi. I was in Tel Aviv already in the aughts. My focus was really on the LGBTQ community and what I could do there. And then in after 2001, after the 9/11, I began to look widen that look to see also be a little bit more active in protesting the injustice that were happening in the territories as well, in the occupied territories. And yes, I would call them occupied territories, the West Bank. I know that some people call them Judea and Samaria because they want to emphasize the link. I do believe that historically, the Jewish people, the root of the Jewish people is in that land. That is my belief. That's my reality. But I don't believe that the people that were living in the land for hundreds and hundreds of years can be dismissed in such a violent fashion. So I have been speaking about, especially since I started Or Midbar. I started Or Midbar with a very small group of people, the organizers, who all believed in the kind of politics, the kind of Judaism that I teach about. And therefore, I don't have to fear a board of directors of a synagogue as I had in the past that would say, Rabbi, you can't speak out that way because so and so is upset because they're gonna pull their donation, they're gonna quit their membership. So I don't have that. I don't even have Or Midbar doesn't even have a proper membership list for that reason. People that want to come, as I said, ahlan wa sahlan, they should be with us. But if they don't, okay. We say in Yiddish, "Geh gesundheit." You should go with health. Ma salam, right? You should go in peace, go in good health. And so when this movie won the Oscar for the documentary, I was very excited to see that there was recognition in the world in one of the, for better or for worse, it's one of the important moments of culture in the United States, the Academy Awards. I'll tell you just as an aside, when we lived in Sweden, really one of the things I loved the most was the big event of the year was the Nobel Prize. And
Mm,
everything around it was glamorous. And I said to my
mm,
wife, said to Sasha, look at the difference between societies that think, that movies are the biggest thing in the world, and society that thinks that the sciences and literature are
mm.
these things. So
Interesting.
anyway, back to this. I said, now that's interesting. I want to see that movie. And I started to look around. You couldn't see the movie anywhere. As you may know, there was there, for whatever reasons. So I immediately said, I have a group of clergy friends here. from a number of the local churches who are all progressive, yeah, Episcopalian, Methodist, Lutheran, and Presbyterian. We get together every month. And I said to the group, I said, you know, we should show this movie together and then have a conversation with it afterwards.
This is your idea.
Oh yes, this is my idea. Yeah. And so I did
Oh,
all the homework. So I started to contact the people I know who are in the um, Israel peace movement. There's organizations like the New Israel Fund. There's organizations like J Street, Bend the Arc. Anybody I knew in
mhm.
that world, I contacted. I said, "You know anybody who has access to the movie?" And it took me about 2 weeks. Finally, I got the name of the distributor, contacted them directly. I said, we'd like to show this. We have a theater. The cultural center has agreed to have us at the theater. So we have a proper theater with sound and everything. Because, people that make movies, they don't want you to show it on,
Oh,
on a TV
and
screen in
totally
your living.
understood. Of course, of
Right.
course.
And so that's how this and a harder thing though was, I'll tell you, it was to find somebody with whom to dialogue. In the beginning, I thought maybe we'd have a panel, but panels are messy. The movie is, I think it's an hour and a half long.
I think
So,
so.
people are not going to stay for 3 hours. Maybe they'll stay for 2.5 hours. It's hard. And contacted different people I knew around who might be Palestinian. Now, you may know I don't think there are that many Palestinians in Palm Springs and even the Coachella Valley.
I know, well, as far as people, I know one person. He's a friend of mine, and there's a few Middle Easterns, but there's only one Palestinian friend of mine that I
Right.
know.
I kind of wanted somebody with Palestinian, the same kind of, more or less the kind of profile that I have, half American, half Israeli. I
Okay.
lived in Israel for 36 years, still more than half of my life and most of my adult life. I knew many people at the mosque, the masjid in
Yeah.
Coachella. I used to be, until the pandemic, I went there on a pretty regular basis. And you've probably been there before. You know that you see faces from all around the world there.
Actually,
It's
I have not.
Oh, it's truly international. Wherever Muslims live in the world and they somehow got here. And there was once an imam I was close with there who would have been a wonderful person to talk to, although he's not Middle Eastern himself, but he's no longer the imam
When
there.
you go there, what do you like? A person like you, when you go there, what do you go there for? May I
Oh,
ask?
well, that's the same for the same reason I go to church, to pray with people. I want to connect with my neighbors. And because I'm a rabbi and spiritual practice, which you could translate right now in this worship prayer, is what I do. I want to be in communion. I'm not using that in a Christian word. I want to be communion with them together to be part of the word. Now, I know there's limits to what I can do in the prayer line. The older guys at the mosque, they always want to pull me in, and I want to say, I'm not Muslim, but I want to be there. I want them to know that they have a white person, a Jewish person, a rabbi, in fact, who is there to be in support. And the first time I went was when the mosque was firebombed. It was probably about 2016 or so. Soon, 15 maybe. Soon after I got here, there was a Molotov cocktail was thrown at it, and so I went with a number of my Christian colleagues here. We went and we stood and we had a press conference there, and that's how I began to know them. Um, there's a Muslim group in Riverside as well, Red Riverside, Sahib, the Sahib initiative. That's a food bank. I'm there every year as well. We usually go for iftar, and so I want to be there. I want to be part of them. But when you back to the point, when you look around, there's faces. It's totally international. Now, I finally found someone, a woman named
Caesar.
Aziza Hassan,
The reason I know
who
the
is
name is from my mother's name as well.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, she's the CEO of an organization that I knew about called New Ground,
Right.
Muslim Jewish dialogue. And so I spoke with her, and she's willing to come out. It's not easy to get people from LA to come out here for a day or for an evening.
Interesting.
Anyway, she's going to come out, and to me, that's because she and I both know the culture of dialogue, the ability to say, I see you, I see your people, I see the suffering, and and the other says, I see you, I see your suffering. We both now, to the point, we're no longer there, but if we were in Israel, in Palestine, We know that I'm going to be here, you're going to be here, we're not going anywhere. Now let's sit down and talk and work it out. Now, is this a peace plan? No, I'm not naive, and I'm not that arrogant to say I have any solutions. But I know that the beginning of any solution is for people to see the humanity one in the other. The film is very specific. The film really only deals with one
Have you seen
particular.
it? Have you seen it already?
Yeah,
Okay.
preparing for it. It deals with a very, very specific slice
Right.
of the horrible situation. It's not about, somebody said to me afterwards, well, they won't talk, something about the war in Gaza. I refuse to talk about the war in Gaza. I said, this is not the
I'm not
war in
doing
Gaza.
Gaza. I'm not doing
The war
Gaza.
in Gaza, as horrible, as catastrophic as it is
Right.
on both sides, but to my mind, far more, far, far,
Far, far,
far more
far more. Yeah.
comparison
Yeah.
to Gaza.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and understand that my daughters, my grandchildren live in Israel. I'm in Israel a lot. My students, my friends, my former congregants. I have a very, very strong connection with the Jewish part of Israel. But that doesn't, I still have room in my heart, and we all need to have room in our heart, compassion, and to feel the suffering of the other, and to include them in our prayers as well. And there are rabbis that have been censured by their congregants around the United States because they dare to mention Palestinian dead or in Gaza or children, whatever, in their prayer for peace, their prayer for healing. And
You know,
so this is a film about human rights abuse by the Israeli government slash the army on a very particular topic. It does not offer a solution. So I hope nobody comes expecting
not even
to say,
behind
oh,
that. Yeah.
now we can figure it out.
No,
This is
no.
a step in the right direction to see the humanity, to see in the other that each and every human being, same in Islam as in the Quran is in the Torah, human beings were created in the image of God, each and every human being, and we all have different understandings, and so it's a difficult movie to watch. And this is not about the war. Now, I'm sure somebody's going to raise the issue of the war, and we'll figure how we'll deal with it. But
Yeah, the reason they're going to do that is because, like I said, one of my promos this week, I want to say, I don't have the exact number, but I would say 95% of the people, if not 98%, 99%, don't know where the West Bank is or what's going on in the West Bank. So for their, hopefully they're going to get to know at a minimum, where is the West Bank? What's the story behind the West Bank? They might know where Gaza is because of the last 16, 17 months, but most people don't know where the West Bank is. Literally, they you know, so, you know, I love hearing you say that for various reasons. So you were born in Israel.
no, I'm
You were
born
not.
in Burbank.
You're born in
I was
Burbank. Okay.
born in Burbank, but I became a citizen the minute there's something called the law of return, which is
Correct.
a very sticky issue
Correct.
because from Palestinians wanting to come back to Palestine, that law doesn't exist, of
Correct.
course, if they
Correct.
want it.
Yeah.
But
So
but whatever it is, I was born in America, but I became an Israeli citizen in 1976, I think, probably 76.
so what
I
was
moved
your
in 70.
education? What was your education growing up about 1948?
So that's a really good question because the term Zionist has been thrown around a lot, and as if Zionist equals Judaism, really complex issue, and I'm not even sure we'll be able to get into it on the 24th. But the Judaism I was born into, that I was educated is basically Jews were dispersed around the world in the last 2,000 years. This is the story. I'm not saying it's historically exactly correct,
Right.
but the last 2,000 years, the Jewish people is an outgrowth of the people of Israel from the Torah, from the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, what we call, and Christianity at one point went in a different direction, starting from Judaism, Jesus as coming from a Jewish community. That's what the Gospels are talking about. Paul himself coming from as a Jew, but turning to a different direction and expanding in a different way. Islam, maybe I had a good teacher at some point when I was 14 who explained to us what Islam was. Maybe yes, maybe no. Remember, this is 70, 71. It was even before the Yom Kippur War, the October War. So people were even less, and understanding that Islam starting from many Jewish traditions of Muhammad, his teachers, went in a different direction in the 7th century. But in the meantime, Judaism kind of developed in different places around the world. But almost every place where Jews lived, at one point or another in history, they were discriminated against. They were sometimes they couldn't own land, they couldn't do business, they couldn't be part of the guilds. They and it's some and that of course culminated with the great catastrophe of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. And so 1948, which came after that, of course, was an answer in some ways. The starting with, and that began in the late 1800s. The late 19th century is when political Zionism began to form. It took many decades for Jews to say, we could go back to the land that was once ours. This is their story, not saying historically absolutely true. The land that was once ours, we could go back and have a Jewish state, which would solve the Jewish problem because Jews are being discriminated against all over the world. And when the Nazis took over, then it was even worse. Jews are being killed in many places in Europe. They're being murdered. So 1948 was a celebration of being able to have a land where Jews could call their own, where every Jew would find a place of refuge. And also, this part is sometimes forgotten, where Jewish culture would flourish.
But
Hebrew culture.
were you at all educated then, or are you now educated at all about the Rothschild story? How the Rothschild was the person family initiated the idea of, okay, let's get them a home and let's do this and let's do that, and the rest took place. Are you at all part of that
When
story?
I was a kid, when I was a kid, we knew the Rothschild name because they were a wealthy family and very historical.
Correct.
And the Rothschilds did many things and still do many things. They're still involved in philanthropic work, the family in general. But there wasn't just one family. That's a mistake. There was an entire movement based in Europe of Central and Eastern European Jews who were many of whom were no longer Orthodox. They were intellectuals. Very few of them. Many of the Orthodox said we have to wait until the Mashiach comes, till the Messiah comes to go back to Israel. But in the end, and there were and so that was happening from the late 19th century where land was being bought. I think that's what you're referring to. Land was being bought. And I didn't learn any of that until I think until I was in university.
So when you were younger, basically, again, like most people, I call it indoctrination. Now if you're in Israel, Palestine, when you were born, when you're a young kid, and I've had this discussion with so many people, yeah, and they're always like telling me their story is right again, about being right, being wrong. They're right because it's their story, and God forbid anybody else can be right. That that's not what took place, and there's so many. I want to say documentation. There's so many footage. There's so many receipts showing where the boat came, and they were sent from A to B. For whatever reason you want to call it, seek shelter. The Rothschild did it. Whatever you want to say. There was a movement in Europe. It's all the same thing. So there's a
Right.
boat that came from Europe or from whatever to
Yes, of
Palestine.
course. Yeah, we all understood that it was Jews, mostly persecuted, were fleeing to a safe place. The details of what we were led to believe, many of us when we were children, I think, that the land was empty. That's
That's what I'm
part of
gonna.
the myth.
That's what I'm gonna get to. That's my point.
That's part of the myth.
That's my point.
But that is no longer, that's been no longer the case. It's similar to Sam. So I grew up here. I went to public school
Right.
until I was 14. Um, you know, we didn't know anything about manifest destiny, if you
Nothing.
know what that is.
Nothing.
We didn't know anything about who lived in this land,
It's not in
the
history.
Korea Indians. I got here in 2015, and I was immediately interested to understand more about the tribe here. And there's an interesting dynamic here. I learned right away about Section 14. I don't know if you've ever spoken
Of
about that
course,
on the podcast.
yeah, a little
And
bit.
Section 14, and I became active in that campaign as well. And I'm really happy to say that paid off, not in a huge way, but still, those payments are now being made of reparations to African American, mostly families that lived here, where I live on Section 14. We live right out the window. That's Section 14 right there.
But
That's that's
is it even being taught in school for the children's sake for history? I don't think it is.
But
It's not.
so what I'm saying that happened all over the world, Sam,
Right.
right? Everywhere in the world where there was this kind of imperialism,
Right.
this kind of colonialism, Africa was a little bit different because Africa still there's a difference of color, and Africa stayed behind in many ways for complex stuff, but I didn't learn about, and I consider myself pretty well schooled in, not just Jewish topics, but I had to learn. I've got a whole shelf of books which are just about a Native American history. I would say Native American injustice in this country. When Black Lives Matter came up, I realized I didn't know very much at all about the history of slavery and how that developed. So I've taken upon these things, challenges to study, to get to know, because if you've had conversations with people say, that's not the story, mine is the right story, what I've learned over the years is my story is correct, your story is correct. They may be correct in different levels, but we're never going to know unless we talk about each other's stories.
Well, but you can't say somebody your story is correct and mine is correct when there's complete evidence of black and white events. So you can't say yours is correct. Well, you said the land was empty. Well, we have receipts. It wasn't empty. Whether
No,
you're right or wrong.
yeah, I understand that. Yeah. So what I'm interested in to find out, why were people told, why were children told, why were we led to believe the land was empty? What's that
Does
covering
that
up?
you
I want to understand that.
yeah? I mean, it's
But
pretty obvious.
I also want to say, for instance, if somebody says, I'm taking this out of context, but if somebody says to me, well, the Rothschilds were responsible. No, the Rothschilds are a small part of that entire gamut of what was happening. The same way about the film, we get back to the film, what we're going to see is a very small thing that is indicative to other things that are happening on the
Right,
West Bank.
of course.
But the facts, as we see them in
Right,
video, we also don't know all of the legal things that happen behind. And I don't know if they matter because right now I want to try to experience the suffering
right,
of those Bedouin
right,
families
right.
who were thrown out onto the street.
Right.
You know,
And he also, and I think at a minimum, an hour and a half is not even enough to talk about how many years of history. I think at a minimum, I want this film. Obviously, you know the story. I know the story. At a minimum, to educate. I think the issue is education. People are so uneducated about these topics. Like I was about the Indians here and this land and who came what first. Even Thanksgiving, the story about Thanksgiving, it's not what it is. And I grew up here and I went to high school here and I went to junior high, but I've never been taught till now, till I was 60. I finally learned what I'm like, wow. So it's education. It's education. At the end of the day,
so
it's all
if
about
you,
education.
right. So if you ask what drew me to this film, back to one of your previous questions,
Right.
that's part of it. I see this as part of educating ourselves
Correct.
to what is happening. Now, if somebody from the Jewish community who is more traditional, more conservative, little c conservative, and says to me, but this is bad publicity for it. You're promoting anti-Semitism, you're promoting anti-Israelism, I will say, this is an honest thing that all of us as supporters of Israel need to deal with. Now, other people would say, yes, but what about Hamas?
Yeah.
Hamas attacked Arabia. That's true as well. That's what I meant about the truth. The truth. That's true, and that's why it's very tricky to say what's the solution for the Gaza Strip? What's the solution for the West Bank? But all I know is that we're not going to solve the problem.
But I also say, if also when somebody always says, "What about Hamas?" I always say, "Well, when did Hamas get started? Let's look at the numbers. When was Hamas created? Because before Hamas, the issues were still going on. The problem was still going on. The beating was still going on. The repression was still going on. So you can't say, that's like somebody saying, "What about Donald Trump?" Well, we had issues with Black Lives Matter before Trump was even called Trump. So that's the thing here. We can't play this game anymore. I want to ask you, go to a thing that you just reminded me of, talking about people anti-Semitic. The mayor of Miami banned the film, from being played in Miami because he called it anti-Semitic. Of course, the mayor of Miami, I don't know his name, and I could look it up, but I didn't want to even be bothered. But here we are when you have people in officials rejecting the idea of education for the same reason that we discussed earlier. You said, well, you're being anti-Semitic, when I called you 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you remember, and I said to you, I'm really excited that you're doing this. And you said to me, I'm excited that you're excited. I was hoping that you're not going to call me and yell at me. Do you remember saying that? What did you mean by that? Why did you say that?
Okay, so I see I think I saw on my phone Sam West or East or
West.
it wasn't the full name. No, it was like Est. Any case, I thought it was a short for another name, so I didn't know who you were.
Right.
And I've been expecting phone calls from people in the Jewish community who are more on the traditional side, who are not happy that the Jews, the American Jews, not all, but there were many voices more loudly heard than others in the American Jewish community condemning this film
Oh
for
yeah.
saying that it's a misrepresentation. There's issues about legal issues. It might even be that it's I don't want to jump the gun. I want people to come see the movie, but
Right.
we'll talk more about it afterwards. I was expecting people to be pushback in the Jewish community, or perhaps in among some of the more Zionist Christians who live out here in the desert. And I'm a little surprised that it hasn't come yet. I'm happy. I'm not looking for a confrontation that way. I'm hoping that people that come to the movie are
I
really,
usually do.
yeah.
I,
I think you're younger than I am. When I was younger, I was looking for confrontation as well.
I think
Part
it's by nature.
part of the part of the what I love about Palm Springs for me, my wife, and my wife's our life here, it's far less confrontation. Last
Yeah.
since or Bar, you know, I anyway. So that's why I was surprised. That's why I was a little surprised. So yeah,
What's the difference between Judaism and Zionism?
that's a really important distinction that I think we're going to try to make. I'm going to try to make on the 24th.
It's a
Judaism
crucial,
is some,
crucial, crucial, crucial.
Yeah, Judaism is something that has existed. I'm not going to say for thousands of years. It's existed for 2,000 years since the interpretation of certain rabbis that lived in the land of Israel after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the first century. So from that and that's what we call Judaism. Before that is biblical culture is not really yet Judaism. It's the religion of Israel. And so what's happened in the last 2,000 years are many different expressions within certain parameters in different places all around the world, even as far as Shanghai, right? Where Jews over the last 2,000 years have landed in different places in Australia, New Zealand. Okay. And in because in so many places in Europe, especially, but also under Islam, unfortunately. There were so many places where Jews were treated as second-class citizens or persecuted or killed, pogroms, whatever it might be. There was this thing called the Jewish question. And it wasn't until the late 19th century, as I mentioned before, where this political movement, this ideology of, well, let's bring all the Jews together to a country. There were those that said it doesn't have to be in the land of Israel. Some people said Uganda, for instance. Some people said, there were other examples of where it might be, but there needed to be a protectorate, so to speak, and that's kind of how it generated. But there were many different understandings of that. One of the understandings, was unpopular, but was the one that I love the most, is Martin Buber, the philosopher. His understanding was, yes, there will be a land that will incorporate local Palestinian culture together with Jewish culture and live in harmony. Perhaps that was naive, perhaps whatever it was. Not everybody was doing the same thing at the same time, right? Those buying the land, those sneaking in, those officially the British government. There were all sorts of things that led to the creation of the state of Israel. That whole movement is called Zionism. It is based on the word Zion, which literally was a name of Jerusalem, another name for Jerusalem in the Bible, and then that became the name for the land, Eretz Zion, the land of Zion. And that's what Zionism is. In the United States, in particular, American Jewish identity became was based on Zionism post 1948. Until 1948, not everybody agreed. Many people thought, we're just as important living in the United States as they are in Israel. The Israelis say this is where all Jews have to live. But that all changed. 1948, 1950 or so, all American Jews, just about all of American Jews, embraced the state of Israel as part of their Judaism. Part of their Judaism. That
and
doesn't mean
and and saying that it also embraced, if you can embrace that, right, then you embraced the event and what happened in 1948. Then you embraced the structure of 1948. Then you embraced the misfortune of 1948.
yes, but there were still those scholars, especially, who said, I don't embrace I understand the need for for Jews to live in the land of Israel, but what was done to in Nakba, the catastrophe for the Palestinians needs to be taken into consideration as well. And so not everybody said, not all Jews, and most Jews didn't go into the details. And that began to change in after 1967, when the West Bank and Gaza were, after all the Arab nations attacked Israel, and the war was won so quickly, held on to the land. They held on to the Sinai Peninsula as well, but that was given back to Egypt in a peace process, as you do well know. Gaza Strip was not, because if I understand correctly, Egypt did not want the Gaza Strip. Israel certainly didn't want to hold on to the Gaza Strip. There were those that said we need to populate, and I was part of that. Not in my ideology wasn't to live in Gaza. My ideology was to live and work the land, to be a farmer, and that was where there was an opportunity. But I was, my excuse is I was young. I was 22. What did I know?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But
Um,
today, though, today, when people when people criticize Israel, I do not think it is correct to call them anti-Semitic. And that's, I think, where your question is leading. For many Jews, if you criticize Israel, you're being anti-Semitic.
Semitic.
And then you get lobbed into, and that's what the government,
Yeah.
the current government, is playing on that little issue there. That's what many, not all, but many of the major Jewish organizations are doing. That's how most of the rabbis are speaking. I do not speak that way.
And
You
it's
can
almost, go ahead.
you can absolutely criticize the current government of Israel for the way its policies and other governments in the past, but not all the people of Israel. I know so many people, Sam, who agree with me, who live in Israel, live in Tel Aviv, live in Jerusalem, in different places, our daughters, they agree with my political view, with the same view. They're embarrassed as well.
I also have a lot of. I've been to Israel. I think I told you twice. And I also have, I being around the Kabbalah Center. I was around for 16 years. I was around what I consider Orthodox Judaism, because that's what it is. Call it whatever you want to call it. It's Orthodox Judaism, and I stand by that. And that's a different conversation. So I spend a lot of time. Um, the narrative about the slogan anti-Semite or anti-Semitic became such a heroin, as drug addicts would call it, or somebody would call it. Just give me that. Just give me to make me feel good. Became that slogan that you use it at any cost, for any reason, for anything, whether it's permissible or not. It became a thing. It's a thing, and that became now almost. And I've watched this. I'm not saying this because I just came up with it this morning. I watched it being said as almost like, if every black person would learn or would teach everywhere they go, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Even though you're gonna go to the grocery store and buy groceries, they say, oh, Black Lives Matter. What does that have to do with buying groceries? It became that. It became that every time you sneeze, as I would say it, you're being anti-Semitic. Obviously, I'm being funny here. And that's what I think one of the major problems that everybody's now starting to buy into, especially politicians, in order for them to keep their paycheck, whether it's from the APAC or whatever. That became the first excuse. You go to the doctor, oh, it must be COVID. You have a flu, it must be COVID. Well, it's not. I don't have COVID. This is the thing. You must be anti-Semitic. You know, if you're going to protest in a college about just an idea, you're anti-Semitic. And that's a problem that now we're having now, that at some point I believe is going to it's already happened, deteriorated and broken, because you just can't keep a slogan for so long and expect it to sit on its own merit, which it has no merit. I mean, it did in the beginning, as you mentioned earlier, being in Europe and being all that and not being liked and being, discriminated against, that maybe then it had some merit, but now it became a slogan.
So Sam, this brings us back to your first question to me. Really was, judging from your bullet points of your bio that I just read.
Yeah.
That's the problem with bullet points. Bullet points are not life. Nuance, what we've been talking about for the last hour or so, is nuance, is understanding that you can't just start here. You've got to try to see the wider picture. You have to, first of all, have common ground, as you started also with, that we have something in common, but we've turned that commonality into something very different
Mhm.
than the word Kabbalah,
Yep.
right? It has to do with not judging a person by the way they look necessarily, or because if you're Israeli, then you must be bad, right? The same thing is kind of happening on the other side to if you're Jewish, if you're Israeli, then you must be bad because why are you not condemning the war in Gaza? So nuance is what it's about.
Let me
Nuance.
let me ask you this, and I know this because I was told by Israelis that live in Israel. Let me ask you this. Um, you mentioned earlier there are people, in Israel that not for the government so much and the way the government behaves. Okay, that's wonderful. But I also know, so let's say that's like, I don't know, 30%, 40%, it's whatever. I just picked up a number. But my understanding is the majority of the 100%, more than the 40%, 50%, whatever it is, majority of the 100% are, try to say this correctly, are anti the Palestinians. So they don't like the government and they think the government is bad, it's corrupt, and it's which it is. But the majority of them is, yes, that's my land.
So the challenge in the way you put it now is the majority is also 51%.
I mean, it was a number. It was a
No, but I'm saying that, so
yeah,
we don't know. We don't have accurate numbers. We won't know until the elections. We can only hope that Netanyahu calls for an early election because he has trouble in his government because of the ultra-Orthodox. That's something that's developing in the last few days. We won't know until the elections,
let's
but
call it
yes,
most. Let's call it most people. Most people. So there's
but
some
there
people
is,
that are
I don't even
anti-government.
want to say most people, but there is a good amount of, and a significant amount of people that, yes, especially after October 7th, they have no room in their hearts for Palestinians. Now, how many people think is it realistic that, like Trump suggested, that the Gaza Strip be totally cleared of people and cleared out? That nobody really thinks that that's realistic. There are some Orthodox Messianic, not Messianic Christian, but Messianic Jewish Orthodox politicians that are in the government today who believe that, but they're
Sure,
a minority and they're
sure,
extremists.
yeah,
I believe that there is a good chunk, whether it's 51% or whether it's 60% of Israelis that understand that there needs to be coexistence with Palestinians. The question is, how can that be done?
that's
I
a good question.
still believe in the possibility of a two-state solution. I have many of my friends on the left say you're naive, that'll never work. We have to go beyond that and think of other kinds of solutions. But one thing is clear, that I'm less and less personally interested in an Israel which is not pursuing justice of some sort of humanity. And while I am still very much committed Israeli, I will say that I'm Israeli and I pay property tax on my apartment in Jerusalem, and our daughters and grandchildren live there. I still I'm not a happy Israeli at all. In the same way that many Americans are not happy Americans right now. So I'm interested in trying to be part of a solution as opposed to saying a peaceful solution, as opposed to saying, well, that's the way it's going to be. We're always going to be at war. So
Two
I'm
more
not willing
que-
to.
two more questions, and we're gonna wrap it up. From a spiritual point of view, you seem like a nice guy. You seem like you're very neutral. You're in the middle. Um, all the boxes check. Um, where do you think people get the idea or the behave in such a way that in order for me to win, I gotta conquer. In order for me to have, I gotta take. In order for me to be, I gotta destroy. Where do you think that idea came from? I know it's very Roman. Back in the day, you gotta slaughter a nation to take over the nation. Back in the day, there were games about people slaughtering each other while the Romans getting bread to watch the show. I don't know if that's still related, but where are we getting that from? Why are we like not? Where's the win-win mindset? Does it ever exist?
I'm reminded of there's a monastery in France that I'm very close with. I go every year, and I remember the first year visiting. It was the time of the second Intifada in Jerusalem. Bombs were going off all the time, and I needed a break to get some academic work. I needed to write something. And a small group of the brothers asked me to talk to them about what it means to be an Israeli, to live in the land. And we looked at one of the Psalms, a particular Psalm, And I said, we've all been taught that everything is about a win-win situation. I said, in pre-modern world, there was no win-win situation. That's something that developed maybe even towards the end of the 20th century. I
Correct.
don't know the exact history of win-win,
Yeah.
but you and I want to go that way. That wasn't it. So if literature that we have, biblical literature, whether it's the Quran, the Holy Quran, or whether it's the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament, are not based on win-win situations. There's definite right and wrong. There's black and white. And so that literature exists. So from where there are places where religion plays a major role, that black and whiteness continues, and it's inspired by, you asked from where? Inspired by a unnuanced, I don't know if that's the right English word. I don't, I've only been here for 10 years, so I don't really always know English well, but not nuanced, unnuanced, dissonance, I don't know. If somebody says, it says in the Torah that if a man lies with another man, that's an abomination. If he lies with another woman, and it's right there, Rabbi, how could you officiate at a wedding of a Jew of two men since I've been doing since 2000? How it says it right there. Well, it also says that if it also says that you should be offering animal
Right.
sacrifices. It says a bunch
A
of things that
whole
we
bunch of
don't
stuff.
do.
Right. Well,
Right.
let me
And so
make it
people will do
simpler.
this.
When we say in the Torah, this is the best part, but they promised me the land. It says right there. And if you know, you think, okay, I'm asking that person that said that, where did you learn that? Obviously, did your mother take you to Hebrew school? Because he says, because the word Israel is a code. It wasn't a country, it was a code. In the Torah, it's a code. So you ask yourself, well, they're saying, well, it says so. It's that says so thing. So in order for it says so, I'm gonna slaughter you because it says so. I'm gonna do whatever I
So
can to get it because it says so.
that's where it comes in cultures that are based on religion. That's where it comes from. But
Yep.
there are plenty of cultures like what's happening in Hungary today, or Putin, or whatever. That's the same kind of I'm right, you're wrong. I'm going to take, you're going to give.
Right.
Uh, that's not based on religion, unless that's based on a very there's that element in humanity which can develop if it's not checked. For me, the interesting question is, what do we do? What do I do as an educator? Because a rabbi is an educator.
Right.
What do I do to help control that? So when it comes to the Torah, I teach, yes, it said that, but that was 3,000 years ago when that was written in a totally different time, different reality. And yes, and I said, and if you would have found the people on the other side of the Jordan River, if we would find their Bible, it would say that the land was promised to them. So first of all, let's all take a deep breath. Second of all, that's why we need to hear the different voices. That's why it's important to hear what does the Quran say about something the same way that the Tanakh says about something. That's why I do interfaith study courses with a New Testament and Hebrew Bible with half Jewish, half Christian group. We've been going now for 5 years. That's a lot of my work is doing that so that we understand each other, so that when a Jew reads the story of Jesus being put to death on the cross with Christians, here's how they've understood it. And then the Christian understands how Jews have said, yes, but you're blaming us for that. That conversation is happening in a calm, nuanced manner. That's what this showing of this film, that's what we're trying to do.
One last question. How does it feel to be an outsider? How does it feel to be called by your own people a self-hating Jew?
So first of all, nobody's calling me anything. I'm not that important. Nobody really knows who I
You know
am.
what I mean. You know what I mean.
So if they are, it's behind my back. I don't
Yeah.
hear them.
Yes.
I have been on the outside in many things. Um, Over the year in the 90s, I was the chaplain of the Israel AIDS task force. So dealing with mostly men who were dying, from 93 for 7 years or so. That's what I did on a regular basis. And the time in Israel, nobody wanted to hear. And there were Palestinians that we were helping as well. That nobody wanted to hear about AIDS, right? Not in Jerusalem. And it took some time. Same thing here, just it was a little later. In the late 90s, I began to be involved in the LGBTQ community, and most of my colleagues said, you're out of the fold.
You're out of
You're
the
beyond.
box.
The people who I went to yeshiva with, because I served in the army with them for many years afterwards in reserve duty, many of them literally refused to speak to me.
How did that feel?
What we'll say hello. It feels it's icky. It sucks. It's not nice. On the other hand, that's why I left that world. I left that mindset world because that's what happens. Excuse me. In Sweden, I was an outsider because I was Israeli American, and I had much more liberal views than many people there. But I was an insider to many people who thought, "Oh, this is the Judaism that I like." There were people in the community that were not attracted to the community before I came, not because I'm right, but because I was offering something different. And after 3 years, the community decided, no, that's not what we're interested in. Okay, that's fine. It was a 3-year contract. Here, I don't feel I'm an outsider because I've created a world in which there are people that want to learn from me, people I want to be with, and the others, I don't have contact with them really, right? It's rare that I
Well,
do. And
someone would say, David, you're alienating the rest of the Jewish world in the valley here. David, you're not really reaching out to all the Jewish people. I can go on and on.
so interesting, you back to that phone call question. You called, I thought that's what it was going to be about, but none of those people have said that to me. And if they're not saying it to me, I don't feel it. Whether they're saying
Right.
it themselves, who knows?
But it never crossed your mind to say, well, maybe I'm going to, obviously it hasn't because it's like, I'll be honest, people tell me all the time, because after I'm very, very outspoken about Gaza. People say, well, Sam, aren't you afraid, about the clients and about people? And I say, listen, if they're going to work with me, they're going to work with me. If they're not, they're not. And if that's going to be their point, that's great. I'm okay either way, because I don't think we need to compromise who we are because you're going to make a sale or take a student in whatever we do for a living. I think that's a worst identity than to be able to, in a very well mannered way, speak your voice or educate whatever it is that you do or that I do. So, yeah, good for you. Good for you.
Thank you.
Good for you.
Thank
Thank you so much for being here. This has been a delight. I have no idea how long it took. Please, everybody that's watching, that if you live in Palm Springs or close by, the film is being screened on the 24th of May in the afternoon. It's a one-time deal. I had no idea that it was David that brought it here. And I just found out yesterday or the day before, it's donation-based. So you can go buy a ticket for $1 if you want to donate $1. You have no excuse not to go. I am personally sponsoring 10 people to go on my dime. I'm not paying $1 each, believe me. I have 6 already. There's 4 more that I want to take. If you listening or watching and you want to come, send me a message after this episode. And hey,
just a moment about that. Thank you, Sam, for that. The donators base is because we want people to come. We don't want people not to come because of the fee, but it'll help us offset the cost. We have some costs involved. We have to rent the film. That helps us quite a bit. The donation.
Honestly, I'm shocked that you guys didn't charge. I mean, the movie tickets are what, $10? I mean, $10 is like not gonna break anybody's bank. I was willing to pay that, but I was really surprised it's donation only because yes, you're right. You have to pay for the space. There's water, electricity. The film have to be run. So I was really, really surprised, and I'm very thankful that you guys are beyond thankful because obviously there's no reason for people not to go and watch the film. And I'm not telling you that because you're gonna like take a side or not take a side. At least you're gonna be educated. And after you leave the film, and they say, "Oh, what a waste of time," so be it. You went for $1. You're gonna get some air conditioning and a discussion after by 2 people. Dave is one of them. No, it's more than 2, right? How many are you on the panel?
No, in the end, we decided just the 2 of us, but we're going to take questions, of course, from the audience.
Oh, because I thought it says on the detail of the film, there's you and the church and other churches involved. There was a bunch of you. That's how
yes, the churches are they're all sponsored because this is the first of many things we're going to do together.
Got it.
The next one is going to be about forced deportations and migration issues here in the Valley.
Wow, I love that. I'll bring you back for that when we'll talk about that. Yeah.
Inshallah.
So inshallah. So yeah, so people, you really have no reason not to go. It's air conditioning, it's gonna be hot. I mean, I would like it to be a sold out event. I know I keep talking about this because I think it's really important. The fact that it won the Oscars and we cannot see it on the big screen, to me, is just daunting. Daunting. So, if you enjoyed the episode, please do me a favor and subscribe. It helps me to people like David here and in the future. And I'm very, very grateful for you. I'm very grateful for you.
As I am to you, Sam.
And what you do. And I will see you on the 24th. I will see you on the 24th.
Be well.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.